Welcome. I get the honor, even though it's somewhat late into our days here, to be the person to say welcome to the Art League's Portrait and Figure Festival. My name's Ted Reed. I have been an instructor here for a decade. I teach portrait and figure in oils. I sometimes teach in pastels, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside over the past couple of years. I also teach still life. Our panel today has Danni Dawson, who you've already met, and then Liberace and Dan Thompson. I'm going to throw a bunch of issues out to the group for general discussion and just see what rises to the top. But before so, I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about the festival, about our 60th year celebration at the Art League, and about why this feels so timely to me and why we're all so excited. It's our 60th year celebration, and we have been doing several things to honor that, but this for me is absolutely the most exciting of the events that we have going forward. We have 1,000 members here, more than 1,000 members here at the Art League. Our school has class seats annually in excess of 10,000. So we get 10,000 people signing up for classes as we go along. We have a spectacular group of instructors, and I'm not putting myself in that group, but really just enormously talented, gifted people who are devoted to sharing the skills that they have with the rest of us. And I am wholly, I'm grown by the Art League. My education is, for all intents and purposes, entirely here. So I can say with complete assurance, you can learn everything that I learned from these people right here at this table. It's a marvelous place. We also have a gallery that has over 70,000 visitors every year. The services that we offer to the members of the Art League outside of the school are so many that they're actually hard to remember, so I made a list. We've got gallery space opportunities, principally through the competitions that we offer every month. We offer lectures, presentations, demonstrations, critiques, all manner of support for ongoing work that artists who have either come into their own or are still in their developing stages need. We have the solo exhibitions. We have a store. And while that may not sound like much, our store, I can almost guarantee you, will always have prices that are lower than any other brick and mortar store in the metropolitan DC area for the same items. They go way out of their way to ensure that they're there to support us, and that's a fabulous feature. For me, the Art League holds a very special place because it fills a niche that I don't think anybody else around here adequately fills. This is my second career. I was a trial lawyer and I became disabled and I had to stop. And I had dabbled in art throughout my life, but this became an opportunity to really delve in and explore and see if there was enough there to make a full lifetime endeavor out of it. And I had 2 children. I've got a wife who works 60 to 80 hours a week. We got a mortgage. There was no opportunity for me to go join a university program or jump into an atelier that was going to last for 4 years. Those were just beyond my means with the number of things that we have going on. The Art League filled that spot, and I got to tell you, it's been a blessing. The community is so warm and supportive, and I was able to craft a complete art education from a very robust selection of classes with tremendous guidance from the office, from the teachers who instructed me on what steps I needed to take, what holes I had in my ability sets, and where to go from there. This is perhaps the best opportunity for someone who already has a life and is not free to devote all of his or her time just to going back to school, to learn everything that is available to an artist. And I can say that with absolute conviction because it was me. I was that person. And hey, look at me, I'm standing up in here in front of you today. This is pretty good. The festival is really our opportunity to share our passion about making art depicting people, depicting the full spectrum of human experience, whether through portrait or figure or paintings about people. And these are subjects that have been at the core of artistic endeavor throughout all of our history. I mean, our first portrait that we know of is that one from just outside Bordeaux that they found, was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago? The drawing of a face on a cave wall that they believe is 27,000 years old. So we go back to prehistoric times. And throughout the course of our history, in portrait and figure have always returned as seminal areas of study and exploration, areas of great importance. During the Middle Ages, they dropped out of vogue when Christianity stepped in after antiquity, and you know, the elevation of the soul as important, and the diminishment of the body, notions of celibacy and chastity made it impossible for figure painting to have a heyday during the Middle Ages. But we had our Renaissance, and throughout the Renaissance, the Baroque era, the Rococo era, the 19th century, portraits and figures have remained central to our development as artists, to our exploration of what the world is all about, and have carried us for ages. Now, I thought seriously before coming in here about taking about 5 minutes of your time and talking about 20th century and then the resurgence of an interest in realism. But I think the general consensus among those of us who are discussing it is that that's a horse that's been beaten so badly that perhaps it's time to move on. The 20th century was absolutely fascinating. It moved away from the classic approach to portrait and figure that had been developed back, as far as we know, during the Greek and Roman era, certainly raised to a level of expertise and excitement that the world had never seen, and we still harken back to now. The principles of art predicated on accurate observation of the natural world, anatomy, perspective, all of that, for a time were viewed as not being important to the artistic endeavor. That explorations of development of sculptures, paintings, whatever you have, were not focused on the accurate depiction of the natural world. Realism took a back seat to deliberate distortions designed to show more about the artist, or to as indictments or commentary on the state of the current world. And schools stopped teaching this. Realism was lost. Museums took their portraits and their figure paintings and depictions of the real world and put them down in storage and brought a different kind of artwork up to the surface. And it was a very hard time for portrait and figure painters who had their interests bounded in. And look at me, I'm now talking about what I promised I would not. So let me speed up a little and say we are presently experiencing a resurgence of interest in realism, in depictions of the world that do depend upon clear, accurate observation of things. And I don't care what style we're working in. I don't care how you feel about the 20th century. The resurgence of interest in realism has created a renaissance of portrait and figure painting. We are now back in vogue. If you, like me, spend most of your time thinking about, dreaming about, wanting to develop portrait and figure art, this feels like our time. And that's why I'm so excited to be here right now talking about all of this. I am going to turn things over to a panel because listening to me drone on and on will very quickly become, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but you could probably be doing better things. So I've put together a group of questions, issues, topics that seem important to what we're all doing. And I'm going to take a seat, and you guys are going to have to either hold the microphone or point it towards you. Apparently it's quite directional, and I know we can all project, but it would be easier for them if the microphones work. And let's talk about some of the things that we find exciting. Which would be lovely if I could remember where I put my list. Here we go. Okay, and once again, the demonstrations tomorrow morning, the 4 people painting at once, will be in rooms 11 and 12 of the Madison Street Annex, not over here at the hotel. Okay, the first thing I want to ask you guys to comment on is putting aside financial demands. What are the biggest day-to-day hurdles that portrait artists and figure artists face? Are they different? If you are a student who is beginning or developing your skills as opposed to someone who's already managed to make portrait or figure painting a primary focus of his or her time? What are the hurdles? What are the burdens? What on earth do we do about it? Now I'm going to have a seat. I don't need to be looming. Rob, you got this.
Okay.
You're nominated.
You know, I mean, I guess the biggest thing for anybody, any artist, is, well, to me, you know, there's that great wave of inspiration that you have when you're a student. You know, you're just so motivated. You've got great teachers to work from. You're very enthused, and you're learning. Like every day, you know, you get a little bit of information, and it, you know, spurs you on to the next day. But you know, and I, you know, still feel that way in a lot of ways. But I think that there's a certain discipline that's very important for any, I guess, for anybody in any kind of sort of field of work or walk of life. But that, you know, just kind of getting up every day and getting focused on your job, on what you need to do, you know, getting in the studio, just trying to make that painting come alive, and working through all the problems you have. I mean, every day there's always something. It's not just the whatever distraction, just the painting itself is going to work against you. You know, it's always kind of fighting you, and it's so easy just to kind of throw away your brush and say, I'm not gonna deal with this anymore. I'm gonna, you know, watch TV or go to a ball game or something like that. But just, and I you know, I remember, you know, years ago in college there was this great quote of Wordsworth, and I didn't spend much time focusing on the poetry in the class, but I did think this was kind of interesting. Is that he said that you know, I think that inspiration was something like inspiration was you know, 10% you know, the exhilaration of the idea, and 90% just getting your rear end onto the seat and working. And so to me, that's kind of the, I guess, you know, one of the things, you know, one of the, you know, things that I.
Among my words, yes.
Yeah.
Dan, what do you got?
I think that aside from financial demands, one of the biggest day-to-day hurdles is developing a narrative for somebody you just met. Somebody comes in to sit for you, and as Danny was alluding to, when they change their position, there's something in the gesture that you just read as an artist. You respond to it, and it makes you think about design. It makes you think about your reaction to them, and I guess that is part of the narrative. But developing some kind of a meaning to the piece that relates to a person you barely know is, I think, one of the hardest things to get at. But I agree with Rob. You know, being your own boss, when you're a student, you come in and you sort of live by a model timer, to the extent that you have 20 minutes built into your brain. It's really weird. You know, when somebody forgets the timer, you know, when the model's about to close, you just know within 10 seconds and 20 minutes has elapsed after a period of time. But I think being your own boss and working at something and working through the challenges of the last painting, which is full of victories and defeats, and, you know, keeps you in your ongoing life narrative as you pursue higher heights. You know, the thing that you didn't do well in the last piece haunts you, and then you do this new piece and you want to raise, you know, the bar. So.
Danny has to say something.
No. I'm sick of black. I've done like 3 judges in a row, and that's the time that you really have to have your life together to go back up here and paint another row. And then, so that the next thing you do is you go in and you say, okay, I'm just going to do this totally differently than I did the last time. But the major thing is you have to force yourself to go there. Now, I don't know if you guys do, but I don't listen to music when I'm painting. I listen to books on tape or books on CD, whatever, audio. And I listen to murder mysteries and stuff like that. And sometimes it's the story that gets me back up into my studio. It's like if I have to paint one more stripe on this shirt, and that's a lot of it. And the other thing I try to do is balance what you need to do is instead of just painting portraits all the time, like Rob is doing figure painting, I'm doing still life. So you have something of your own that you're working on too. I mean, you're trying to make your portraits the best you possibly can, but sometimes you just get sick of them. And then you need something to, like, paint a pumpkin or something like that for a while, and then go back to it.
I want to add a couple. I have the virtue of thinking of these questions, so I've had much more time to dwell on details and facts.
That's
But
not fair.
I know, it's totally not fair. You can ask the next question. No, something Rob said rang a big bell with me. The getting yourself there, sitting yourself down, and not getting up again. I left the office world where it would never occur to you to get up and go do laundry or answer the phone. I didn't have people saying, can you just go pick up my dog? Which happens as soon as you say I'm an artist rather than I'm a lawyer. One of the biggest problems, yeah, kids, yeah, can you just pick them up? No. One of the biggest problems that I experienced, and I was lucky that my family was behind me 100% right from the beginning. Apparently I was a nicer person to live with. But the rest of the world did not deem my profession as professional. And so there was this battle that I needed to wage with relatives, with friends, and with lots of colleagues, because my day is a work day, and I'm going to use those hours for work. No, I'm not going to empty the dishwasher. No, I am not going to go pick up your dog. And it was a challenge. And I know a lot of people I've discussed this with have faced just that same dilemma. How do you convince everyone else that, no, this is not a hobby. This is what I'm going to be doing. And once everybody finally picked up the narrative here, my life got so much easier. The other is, I work from home. And yes, commuting by bathrobe is nice, but there are so many distractions in a household that you don't have when you're working in a studio. I think for anyone, and this is, I found particularly true with students who are taking classes, getting your own painting space that is dedicated to that is among the most important things you have to do. If you have to move around in your house or clean up after you so that people can continue to live there, it's an enormous impediment. But even after you accomplish that, simply being within range of the dishwasher is itself a hurdle. And people will call your house for legitimate reasons that have nothing to do with your work. You cannot answer the phone. And that took me a while. I didn't realize that I was so undisciplined until I had to face those particular issues. Those are hurdles. Those are real ones that are trouble when you're initially beginning this as a full-time sort of a practice. Okay, I want to switch topics if you don't mind. People today are surrounded, I believe, by more visual imagery than they've ever been at any time in history. We've got, everywhere you go, beautiful reproductions of photographs in malls, in buses. You can't turn around today without seeing some kind of an image. My daughters, when they were before their teenage years, were taking hundreds of photographs a day off of cell phones. And I heard a stat on some news station 2 days ago that Facebook users upload 300,000 photographs every day. The question is, does this access to photography, to digital imagery, my younger daughter takes photographs, puts them into Photoshop, draws, connects them, and makes new images all the time. My little 14-year-old is more accomplished in Photoshop than I ever think I will be. Is this helpful to us? Is this harmful? How do folks who are dedicated to traditional art face a world with such easy access to so many different types of images? Anybody want to wrestle with that?
Try. But, I mean, I think, since the beginning of time, there's always visual imagery around us. Once we wake up, we're looking around, we're seeing images all the time. And I think it's, to me, all the access to digital images and photographs, and if anything, it just makes things a little more exciting and accessible. I think if I'm working on a picture and I need, a striped shirt or a hand position, there are all kinds of, just Google image, and I'll have all kinds of things, every type of lighting. To me, it's a great resource that I can, cull from in order to develop an idea or attach it to and some of the things in movies and even in digital illustration, I think are pretty extraordinary. It doesn't inspire me to create work, but I definitely see certain people get really energized by in coming up with just extraordinary ideas, particularly in that field of illustration. I think it's you know, I don't think it's a problem to have access to all this information. I think that the problem is, especially for students or even artists, when you're working with, if you are working from photos, and I don't have a particular problem with photos, but there is a certain allure to the photograph because of the level of perfection that's there. Even in a little, you know, camera from a phone, it would really be, in a lot of ways, so much better organized than anything I could ever dream of doing. So if I try to play by the rules of the photograph, or you know, if I'm too obligated to those things, then I find myself just getting completely overwhelmed. You know, I find that I'll never be satisfied, but there is something in the act of painting and creating a work of art when you are producing the strokes and the color, and there's something that's deeply compelling about that. And I think it will never go away, no matter how perfect and how many megapixels we can pack into a camera phone or anything like that. You know, I think that the decisions that an artist makes, the way, the calligraphic quality of their things, even the roughness, I think that's probably the more important thing, because we were talking about Mancini yesterday, and that just raw, awkward quality to some of the paint. And it just gives a certain humanity to it. I think somebody like Sargent almost had to artificially create that awkward stuff. You know, you could see him like, this is too easy for me. You know, he's probably the only one that could maybe do things better than a photograph. And so he'd have to kind of, you know, rough things up a little bit just to, you know, give it that tension. I think if everything's too perfect, it kind of loses that you know, that drama, I think, of those two kind of polar opposites. I don't know if that really answered the question. Yeah.
All right, I'll take it on. I think that it's a really complicated question, because photography is everywhere, and I teach at the New York Academy, and it's one of the biggest discussion points at the Academy. I think maybe not knowing the answer to the question keeps us painting, and it's a good thing that we are trying to come to terms with it. I think when it comes to the photograph itself, teaching the head, I think it's fascinating how the landmarks of the human face somehow aesthetically have been removed in conceptions of beauty, and so it keeps us thinking about what is a beautiful face. If you look at, you know, the model photographs, there's no, you know, the whole set of landmarks, it's all gone. It's whitewashed, or it's been bleached out, or it's been lighted out, or make-upped out, or photoshopped out. So aesthetically, there's an interesting thing going on. I think that it's been a profound change, but not profound enough to discard 25,000 years of artistic heritage. I think you have to learn how to draw and paint, and then you become enamored with the filmmakers and the people that are at the top of their game, the vanguard of different art forms, and it motivates you further to come to terms with it. I think on a negative side, it's disturbing sometimes how technology is equated with ease, or advancement is equated with ease, and that runs counter often to artistic training, where people, they really have to work very, very hard, no matter what, to get to the new heights, or to you know, more proficiency. And I think ease and better, I just don't think that's been a very positive aspect of things. But photography is one of the great challenges right now, because life painting is harder and harder to get to, but it seems to be the key, because you can't get the gesture from the photograph, as far as I've been able to tell. I've never been able to paint from them myself with enthusiasm, but I do not, by any stretch of the imagination, call into question those who do. I think, you know, life is a variety. So.
Well, thank God it's not the old days, because then you would have to take your film. You have exactly 2 hours with the head of a big corporation, and you take your film in, and they say, well, this and this, and then it comes out, it's all black except for one photograph that you can't use. Then you have to call them back and say, can I have another session with this guy? Well, yes, in about 3 months or something like that. So I love digital. And I can look at everything. And then I met, a long time ago, this artist, Caleb O'Connor. And he just looked at me and said, what are you painting from photographs for? So we go down, and he buys me, or he didn't buy, I bought it. but this gigantic computer. And he goes, just put this in your studio and paint from this. You just, you know, you can just look right down it. And he paints right from the computer. And the interesting part about doing that is the colors are so much better when you look at a computer than they are from photographs. I like the photographs because I like to translate it myself, but I can really see all that. And I love photography. I have a lot of friends who are photographers, so I think that, you know, if you do it right, that takes a lot of time to learn too. So that's kind of how I look at it. But I love my digital camera, and I like the idea that I can move everything around. So that's what I think.
I'm in a slightly different boat here. I shoot a lot of photos when I'm working with people. I found that if you're doing portrait commissions, usually the amount of time that they're willing to give you is inversely proportional to what they'll pay. And so the photograph becomes an essential tool. And Danny was the first one to start teaching me how to farm information out of a resource that blows out lights, turns darks to black. And I know technology has advanced demonstrably since I started. Cameras can produce images that are much more useful, particularly if you're just reading them off a screen. I still find photographs get in the way more often than not. And I'm always struck by the distortion. And yes, I can correct that, but it's so much easier in life. I'm always struck by how, at any close range at all, unless you're I'm sure there are photographers with skill that far exceeds my own. The single lens distorts faces. 2 eyes wrap around the more of the head, so the face occupies less space. I see a lot of folks creating paintings of people from photographs, where that's the only resource that they presently have, where the faces are overly large. And I can't tell whether it's that artist is viewing the face as more important and diminishing the head to match, or whether it's simply that the camera isn't grabbing as much of the skull. I find that I have a natural instinct and a penchant to run towards details. In real life, I don't look at the details. When I'm looking at a subject, I look at the things that are most important. I'll look at the eyes, I'll look at the mouth, I'll look at somebody's hand gesture, but I don't examine with perfect clarity the outside edge of somebody's shirt, or how many wrinkles they have going into a pocket. But a camera image, a photograph, says that's just important as other things that I wouldn't look at naturally. So I often find myself lecturing to students about what an atrocious resource something is that they're going to have to depend upon, and I don't think that's helpful. The bigger issue of how do we remain relevant in the world, I think we always will be. There is something powerful, Rob was saying, about art, about something that's created by the hand of man. And so I've never been worried by that, but rather more its application. It's so easy to have the microphone first and get it back last. I'm not going to speak next time around. Okay. For those of us who paint paintings on commission, principally portraits, but it can apply in other contexts as well, how much room is there for artistic expression in commissioned work? How difficult are clients to work with? How do you deal with the fact that you're not the one designing it top to bottom, side to side, front to back? When you have to serve a client, how do you handle that? Anybody want
That should probably go to Danny first.
Yes,
she's the
I've been
master
doing
of
it
that.
the longest.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't really have a problem. I think that I haven't had a problem for years because I just don't accept commissions when I don't like the people. And that's pretty clear right away, because you get people that are pushing you and they want this or that or the other. It's a judgment call, I think. And I do insist that they sit for me because I can't do the skin tones without it. And I've never had a problem since. One of the things I've found out is that you really have to lay down the law with them and say, I'm just not going to paint that. Or another thing, if you are going to wear that tie and that shirt, it's going to be another $2,000. I spent all my time painting all those lines and little tiny ducks and stuff like that. Unless you pay for it. No, some people don't care. And like I said before, the other thing I found is some ways that you work with people is you make sure that they get a painting. Even if it's just a sketch like I did today, they really appreciate that enough so that they'll they make time for you in their schedule. And that's kind of what I've had. And you have to look at it in a different way too, and that is that these people aren't going to get the painting. They don't care about it. They're usually on their last month or two of work, and they have a lot under their belts that they want to get done, and you're last on their list. So anyway, that's what I found. But I think it's easier to deal with if you're nice to them and you're fun. Like everybody who's come to pose for me said, like this judge I just painted said, that was easy. I thought it was going to be horrible. I'd have to sit there for hours at a time. Well, the truth is, that woman could not have sat still for hours at a time if she had to. So thank God for the camera, because she was like this. She was doing that thing where, you know, you sit and you sort of rock and she's talking. And so that's why I love cameras, because I can get that, then they can sit there and they can move, they can do whatever they want to.
Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, so some of the work, some of my favorite work is sort of confined and defined so much by certain rules, I guess, rules of the commission, you know, whether it be somebody like Holbein or Rembrandt or Sargent, you know, all these, even, you know, the Sistine Chapel, there are certain, you know, rules and restrictions, things that he could paint and couldn't paint, and he had to, you know, run ideas before certain committees and things like that. I think it's just part of the world, you know, or part of the career of an artist, unless you're just working on your own little pictures like a Vermeer, you know, that would probably be the ideal thing, you know, just kind of sit making your own thing all the time. But then again, I would think I would miss painting portraits. I think I really like painting people. If they have certain ideas of the position of the head, I'm willing to you know, I won't raise the price that much, but, you know, I mean, I'll kind of, you know, give some certain allowances. I think that and then try to create a work of art within that framework. It's maybe not the easiest thing, and so much portraiture is fairly, you know, pedestrian and conventional, and that's pretty much all they want anyway. You know, they just want something to fill an opening on the wall, along with those other kind of blue-suited people, but you know, there are certain artists that can rise up above that and really find a way to be inspired by, you know, just the paint itself, the extraordinary quality of a human face, even if it's a face you don't really like. You know, it's a funny looking face, but, you know, I think there might be something I can do with it, you know, and then sometimes you just can't do anything. You know, they turn this side or that, you know, there's always some way to make it work, you know, and then it's good to have, you know, have other people that you can talk to, say, how do I make this work? You know, my wife is really good at that. So, have the person turn around the whole, you know, draw the back of their head. She's got all kinds of really good ideas. But you know, and then I look at those Sargent paintings, and again, you know, I think everything, for me, it almost always goes back to Sargent. And I look at all those, so many of those paintings are commissioned. And I just look at the poses and the way these people present themselves in the painting. And I'm sure that there's a certain amount of artifice to it, but he makes it so real. Like, these people actually did have their fingers in all kinds of weird positions and took those great dramatic poses, and, you know, and all that, had all that energy, and they were all just, you know, kings and queens of the world. I'm sure that wasn't the case. They probably just all did sit and rock, and their hands always looked kind of gnarled and rough, but somehow he was able to transcend that, and I think that's a special thing that for me has always been an inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I can say better than that. You know, I went to art school in the DC area, and I remember going into the first class in art school. Not here initially. Unfortunately, I didn't start here. I should have been here. But they brought everybody in, and they said, okay, do anything you want. Anything you want to do. Absolutely, everything is valid. And it was surprising how limited everything looked. It all looked terrible, because we could do anything we wanted. And I think when I think about a commission is simply an opportunity. They might want to rename it opportunity in some cases, for growth, because it's just a set of parameters. You're going after a certain type of thing, but there's power and limits. There's a lot of power in the opportunities for growth and advancement, and I think that's a very special thing. So, I don't know what else to say. I think that an earlier answer that Danni gave is a great answer. She said, you're painting still life, you're painting landscape, and if you're painting these things because you want to be a painter, then you can limit the commissions that you accept, because if this doesn't look like it's going to help you to move in the aesthetic direction you want to go in, then don't accept it. Don't look at it. And you also have devoted your time to the great language of painting from life or painting from direct observation. So I think those things are very important. And with regard to portraits, it's amazing how truly beautiful people are. I mean, when you get them in front of you, I mean, all kidding aside, it's just incredible. You look at the spirit of the person in front of you. I was thinking about all that unrest out in Ferguson earlier this summer, and this is completely bizarre, but they have conscription in certain countries and things like that. I was thinking, they had to make people paint everybody, because there's something about, when you have all these notions of, I don't know, racism or whatever it is, preconceptions of people, but when you're painting somebody, there's something going on between you and the person. And you learn about the beauty of the individual, the beauty of the spirit or something that presents itself to you that keeps me going. I just endlessly fascinated by it. So, I mean, I always ask the students who are in the classes, consider the person posing for you now as the most beautiful individual we've ever seen for this period of time, because it'll be all consuming, and I think that opportunity in a commission is a pretty special thing. So.
What Dan just said segues so beautifully into another topic. I'm going to have to live by my rule. With one exception, I will say one thing. When I was starting out, I had real trouble with this because I didn't say no enough. And I was desperate for every commission that came along. And so I recall one instance when I had reached the last presentation. This was the final payment, it's done. And the client, with a bright smile, said, "It's absolutely lovely, but can you turn her sideways and paint the background black?" And saying no, that's a different painting, was very hard for me. I think whatever limitations there should be from the client, you need to get them in front. And then you have to be able to say no, and that was hard. Dan was talking about the dialogue or the relationship that you develop with someone that you're painting. One of the topics I wanted to ask about is how much, when you're working on a portrait, how much of it is you? How much of it is the subject? How does that relationship between you, it always struck me that portraits aren't just depictions of people, it's also about the artist, and it's about how the artist communicates that communication to the viewer. And I'm curious to see if you all have thoughts on how much of every painting is you, not just what you're depicting. And what Dan said before struck me as really true, so I thought I'd carry it forward. You guys want to say something?
Sure. Well, I've said this a lot of times before, probably in a class with you, but I think it's 95% the artist. Because if you are alive and you love life and you enjoy all the different things that you do in your life, that person can be boring, flat-faced, everything else. But what's happening instead is you will pick up somehow on movement or a feeling of them that they might not even know they have. And I think you can really see that in paintings when there's just there's a life in that painting instead of it just being a portrait. You can really get the feeling of who that person is. And for me, that takes time in terms of getting to know the people. I like to know what they collect, everything about. By the time we finish a portrait, we're friends. So I have all these people that I painted in the past that they keep up with me and I keep up with them. And you get into discussions about books and you find out more and more about them. So that's what I think. I think it really has to do with the artist that you choose. Like this, a ridiculous thing just happened to me. This guy wanted a painting copy, not a painting, a photograph copy from 1952. And so he emailed me and said, "I want you to copy this." And I said, "You know what? I have students that can do this a lot cheaper because it's a gift, right? And I have at least 7 that can really do this well. And he kept saying, well, what's our next step? And he's sending more photographs. And finally, he said, what's our next step? And I said, the next step is, it's 8 by 10, you send me $5,000 down and $5,000 when I finish. Now, let me recommend somebody else. And he said no, so he's paying me for that. And finally I said, why? And he said, because I saw the portrait that you did from a tintype at Georgetown University. That was like 50 years ago or something. And it feels like that guy is alive. And I think that that's really what it comes down to, is whether you realize it or not, you really are putting yourself in there. But the more you like the person, the better the painting. That's what I think. Or the more you appreciate the person, the better painting you're going to get. Whereas some people are afraid to paint people that they know really well. I feel the opposite. So.
Well, it's hard to add to that. I mean, I think that's that's a perfect answer to the question. You know, in a lot of ways, when she's talking about her, you know, I'm thinking about so much portraiture that is just kind of vacant, and I'm sure it looks like the person and all that, but there is something that you know when you look at a painting, you want to know who did it, you know, and there's something about the personality of that painting that you know says that an artist created with a certain force. And I always know Danni's painting. It doesn't matter if it's a quick sketch or a finished painting, and I'm more interested, even with Sandra Deocon, I'm more interested in the painting and her hand in the picture. And so, you know, when you look at any, you know, Rembrandt or Holbein, or you know, it's very rare that you have, unless you have a particular fascination with history, you rarely care about who they painted. You really just care about the painting, how it was produced, who did it, and you know, what that person was like. And I think that the greatest artists do put so much of themselves in their pictures, so much of, you know, just their vision of what a picture should look like, apart from all the preconceptions and prevailing ideas and opinions of academies and schools and things like that. You know, at a certain point, you need to go beyond that, and it is hard because very few people do. Very few great artists, really good artists do, but the great artists, yeah, that's something special. When I look, you know, all these guys here, there's a signature there that's very much, you know, a Dan, a Ted, or a Danny when I look at their pictures.
Also a good answer. Hawthorne used to say the greatest painter is the best liar. And there's something about, you know, when you start, I find there's this period of time it usually happens around sort of a late beginner stage when somebody's studying value, and you say, well, you have to compress the range. And you say, what do you mean compress the range? I say, well, you have to lie a little bit. You can't do that reflected light, that light, because you're going to blow the range. It's going to get all messed up, and there's this little epiphany that happens where I can't do what I see. I've got to do something a little bit different than reality. And I think that's the beginning of the insertion of the individual into their work, is figuring out how to make your presence not clumsy or impede the feeling that you're trying to get, or imbue the image with some kind of a deeper meaning. It's probably not a conscious thing, but I think that they're more interesting when the artist is a real presence in the image through the brushwork, through the calligraphy, as you mentioned, than they are if there was an absolute focus on photorealism. I've never been really all that interested in the photorealism because it seems to lack the passion of the individual. So that's what I would say.
Okay, let's turn over and talk for a moment about figure painting. And let's keep it general. What are your sources of inspiration? What drives you or compels you to design, commence a figure painting? Any takers?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, just primarily, I just, you know, love energy and action, and you know, if there's a model that seems to have a little bit of that force. They don't even have to hold the pose very long, but that's something that I've always loved. I've always loved dynamic paintings, and so I think that's something that's always gotten me interested in figure art. And even there may be more stilled, even to a certain ang, especially his drawings, when they're maybe not so physically dynamic, but there is that energy that seems to suggest that kind of deeper, kind of roiling force that's coursing through all of us. And I think that's another thing that is the mark of really good artists, even those that paint very carefully. There is that little tremor of life that's in there that I think is really special. But with the models and figures, the ones that really kind of show it off a little bit more, I kind of like that. I like the dramatic energy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are various opportunities for art, practitioners, students, and professionals alike to go into cadaver labs and start looking at the raw anatomy, so to speak, the raw material that goes past the anatomy book. And the first thing you notice is the lack of what we really are, which is spirit. That's who we are. That's what we are. We're a life force. And when you look at the full body, it's got all the likeness in a way, but it doesn't really have the individual. The individual is ethereal. And there's something about the individual when they take that pose, as Rob was alluding to, the energy that they possess that's so compelling, you just can't help but become almost obsessed with it. And aside from that, it's the great engineering miracle of the long pose, the way the body takes a frozen contraction with a multitude of gestures and sort of maintains something, and how you can translate that onto a canvas, transpose it, and hopefully form a story around it.
I think I like to work with things that are around me, so I've talked all my friends into posing nude for me. And the last one, I don't know, I have dreams about these things, and one of the dreams I had was there was this person in the shower, and I thought, my God, I'm gonna paint that. And so I wake up at night and I write down beside my bed these ideas that I have, like at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then I talked my best friend, one of my best friends, Janet, who's 70 years old, into taking a shower and letting me photograph her in the shower. Then I realized that the coolest thing about the whole thing was the shower curtain. So it became a painting about an old lady in a shower with a shower curtain. And then it won a bunch of prizes in Europe, and then I decided, there's something really wrong with that painting. It doesn't have the right feeling to it. It's about 12 years, no, it's, how old is it now? 2 years old. And so I repainted the whole bottom half of it. And then when I got to Italy, there was this really young girl, Flavia, and she was posing for my classes. And I went, you know what? Can you go stand in that shower? And she said, I'm wearing my bathing suit. And so I went, no, you have to stand there nude. And I'll pay you like 100 euros if you'll let me photograph you nude. And I promise you it'll never get on the internet. And then I started a whole series of showers because it felt like a place where people are comfortable for themselves. And for me, that's just key. Like with Anne Marie, I know her so well. Janet, I painted. The little girl across the street has been painted so frequently that, every time she gets a new dress, she assumes she's getting painted again. So anyway, but that's kind of how I look at it for figure painting. For me, it always had to be really personal. When I was really young, I did a whole bunch of like sketches and things like that. But now it's more. I'm trying to think where people would be and they would be nude, that they would enjoy themselves. So that's.
I have so many rejoinders to that. Her first comment was that she convinces all of her friends to pose nude. So I'm both offended and really relieved.
Time will come.
Only if she does it too. So we had.
You wouldn't want that.
I found that whatever I think of as going to make a great figure painting, ultimately is not what I end up making. That once I get into them, I'm discarding canvases right and left, because there's something else that happens that becomes more alive, more compelling than what I initially envisioned. cannot tell you how many days I've wasted setting people up only to realize 3 days later, if I'd been sitting on the floor, it would have been a much better painting. And so now my practice, and I do it with portraits as well, but not nearly as often as I do with figures. I assume that whatever my brilliant inspiration is, while it got me going, and that's a fantastic thing, may not present the best thing to paint, and leave myself more room to figure things out. When you get working with somebody live, things change. And I think when I realized that I didn't have to stick with what I'd already started, my paintings got better. And
especially when you have them in a shower. This woman in Italy said, if you don't let me out of the shower, I'm never working for you again. And I went, okay, well, you're out then. And then once she saw me start the painting, then she said, can I pose for the next one? So you kind of get into that. She was really fun.
I'm not promising you that if we ever reach that stage. Okay, let's talk about students for a moment. What's the most common mistake you see students make? Something that is just endemic among the group of folks with whom you get an opportunity to work. If there's one thing you could say to everybody, don't do this, what might that be? I'm just curious.
Well, with my students, there are no problems. But in other classes, one thing I do notice, and you were mentioning this, earlier, Dan, is that there is this sense that we need to be absolutely faithful to exactly what's in front of us all the time. I mean, that's what realism is. You just paint that, and the sense of interpretation, the sense of making decisions that are in the best interest of the painting, not just in the best interest of matching my photograph or matching the setup, is something that we tend to lose sight of, and that interpretation is something where a tremendous amount of personality comes through. How you're going to maybe key up a painting, or bring up the color more, or mellow it, and maybe even moderating it quite a bit, and it's taking all the color out entirely. There's all kinds of things that you need to adjust and drum. You need to, when you're writing about something, you don't want to. If you're writing in a way where you're trying to tell a story, a compelling story that people want to read, you don't really want to just describe facts. Just there's the person sitting on the chair, and he's wearing a blue shirt, and there's a gray background. I mean, nobody is interested in that kind of description. But if you heighten certain things, what is it about that that blue shirt and the maybe iridescent way that the background is kind of reflecting in there, and I'm going to exploit that, and I'm going to show people the things that I see that are really interesting about this setup, about this person, about the way this paint feels. I love the way it swishes, I love the way it gets detail, I love the way I can keep it quiet. There's all kinds of things there, and then but if you don't open yourself up to that world, which is really where art is, then it really is just a assembly of, you ultimately just become accomplished at recording facts, and the camera does that much better than we do. So.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I feel pretty much the same. It seems as though when people get into classes with me, and mostly I teach up in New York, but in various places, they seem to forget that they started painting because it's a blast, because you have just the greatest time ever. It's better than any concert or hockey game or whatever. It just is, it's awesome. And it makes you feel alive. It's got to be the same feeling a race car driver feels when they're going 200 miles an hour. And when you get into a class, you're going to make mistakes. And I think there's almost an expectation that you're not going to make mistakes, and you got to be a little easier. As you said, be easier on yourself and keep the balance, because you're not there to be perfection. You're there to learn, and as you learn, you're going to regress, and then you're going to jump forward, and then you're going to learning is messy. It's not linear, and you have to balance the supreme enthusiasm, which keeps you painting and keeps you drawing, with the ins and outs of difficulty. And heightening your visual acuity. And I think without that, you lose your focus and you expect, you start getting people with meltdowns in the middle of a lesson, storming out, attempting to assault you in the hallway between the restroom and the studio. You have to figure out how to channel that genuine enthusiasm in the right way so it keeps you learning and keeps you growing, keeps you engaged, and makes you happy. I think you have to sometimes step back and say, why do you paint? And I know I paint because it makes me happy. And that's what I would say.
Okay, I call that copying without composing. What I try to teach in my classes is that we are not here so that you can paint that model exactly like that model looks. What we're here for is for you to learn how to create paintings that you really enjoy doing. Because a lot of times when you get into a classroom situation, the students have the idea that what you want from them is for them to copy that painting. And what I try to get them to do is to change it into something else. In other words, put down color notes, different things all over the place, and see what you can make out of that model in that classroom, as opposed to just copying it perfectly for me, because you think that's what I want. And so I'm always telling them, make mistakes, have some fun, and then we sort of go on from there. But that's what I think is really, I think a lot of it is they expect that we expect that they get a perfect likeness, everything is perfect. And so what I did a long time ago is I just lost that expectation. And then a lot of times if they feel like they can just play, then they'll get it, and it'll be much more interesting too.
I realized the danger of asking the question, what's the biggest problem that your students present, when Rob said none of my students have any problems. And then you guys stole my answer, which was, yeah, I think that the biggest challenge that I face is people don't believe in themselves and they don't believe in the process. It's so easy for us, and I remember I was there, I was terrified. I remember the first day, I should tell you this story. The first day I went to Danni Dawson's class. I'd never been able to take her class in the daytime because I'd been working. I was finally free to come in, so I took Danni's class. And you looked differently than I expected you when you walked in. I had this sort of Professor McGonagall image coming in, and Danni comes in. First thing she says is, okay, just paint. I don't know enough of you, I've got to see what you're doing. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm already being tested. I was all the way around on the far side of the group of students from where Danni entered, and I had no idea how much her students love her and how much she loves her students. We had a delightful pair of women who ultimately became good friends of mine as well, who were directly adjacent to me, and they had this banter thing that I now know had been going on for years. But so far as I knew, they were as petrified as I was, okay? So she comes around the horn, she got 4 away from me, and you turn to Jackie, and you looked at her painting, and I'm painting, I'm like, it's better be good, I don't want to be kicked out. And you said to Jackie, no, 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 no. I stopped painting, and just stood there, and then you walked over to, this is terrible, I'm all 50, I will lose 9 names. Her name will come to me in a second, and you picked her painting up, and you picked Jackie's painting up and said, no, 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 do you want it to look like this? And I almost fled. So I do remember what it's like to have your heart on your sleeve all the time as a student. And one of our challenges is when we get a new class and new people, we have to figure out where they are. We have to read how vulnerable are they, how ready are they for criticism, and unless you're Rob and everything you said comes out like poetry, it's going to be a challenge. Having said all of that, none of my students have any problems at all. No, the biggest issue is always that I think, is that people don't trust that you're there to make mistakes, you're there to play. This is not for presentation, and you are growing when you totally bungle it. Folks don't accept that, and you'll tell them, and I've had people leave my class very downcast when they've actually accomplished something wonderful, and that's, for me as a teacher, one of the toughest things with which to work. Okay, we're down near the end, so you guys are almost free. So we should skip that and go over, since I saw it back on my wrong set of papers. Well, can you tell me, what the worst instance you ever had was with a client or a gallery. Do you have a story that you're willing to admit to in public where something went so horrendously wrong that it's always stayed with you? I know you don't, Rob.
Well, let's see. I mean, I do remember this one. I did this one demo, and it was at a gallery opening, and which is sort of unusual. You don't usually do demos, and it was with a nude figure, and it was in the middle of New York City, and it was this big gargantuan guy, and it was open to the public, and there was no stage or anything. It got a big open space, and people just kind of came in from all over, all kinds of people, people in suits, people, with shopping carts, they came rolling in, and I started to, and they came really, there was no tables, there was no proper distance to be away from the model or the artist, so everybody was kind of crowding around. And so, you couldn't move back, and I was kind of drawing like this, and everybody's looking at the picture, and then and I was drawing, and I was talking about what I was drawing, and I was, kind of trying to name things, and somebody came up to the model and said, what's that right there? And I said, well, first of all, you can't touch the models, okay? And they were all right around the model, too. And then the model just turned around and said, oh, I don't mind. And that was the wrong thing to say. All of these people came around, and they were like, what's this and what's that? That was absolute chaos. So I think the way we arranged it here is the ideal approach for demos.
I can't top that. Come on. I mean, there's never been a normal experience. I mean, that's what keeps it interesting. All the commissions and all of the demos. The one I think of as you're talking is doing a demo in Caminati a few years ago when there was a raging thunderstorm. Remember that, Allison? Were you there? And it was like flashes of light and crashes every few minutes, and it was the second night of the demo, and it was nearing the end, and suddenly there was a big explosion, and the whole place went black. And I said, I guess that's the end of it, And we didn't get the power on for a couple of days, but that's what comes to mind with me.
You have more stories than anybody I've ever met. There has to be one in there.
There's one I'm not going to tell you.
We're all friends.
I don't know if you would want to know this one. That's more to do with the model. But one of the funniest ones that happened to me was I was painting this woman, and my husband is an artist, and he's always commenting on what I'm doing. Like, I'm working on this record right now for Christchurch, and Mike walked in and goes, Danny, Palladian windows actually have certain measurements. Because they're just squares all over the place. But anyway, so this woman came in and she posed for me. This is about 35 years ago or something. Well, first of all, she was about a size 1X, and she brought a size 12 dress with her. And then she put it on the front of her, sort of like that. And I was like, okay, what is this supposed to mean? I'm supposed to paint her in this dress, which she can't wear. And so then I painted her, and she said, well, don't you think you're making me a little bit wide? Right? So I started trimming her down. Then finally, she said, well, don't you think those wrinkles, I don't think that wrinkle is really like that. So I said, okay, we'll just take it out. So pretty soon she started looking, instead of being in her 70s, like maybe she was in her late 30s. And then so her husband came in, and I was hoping to get some feedback from him. And so I said, he said, well, she thinks she's too fat. And I said, okay, well, what do you think? And he said, I think you ought to put her dog on her lap. And then after that, I said, well, and the wrinkles, she doesn't like the wrinkles. And so then he said to me, well, consider it this way. You are now preparing a painting of her that she can take to a plastic surgeon. That was the weirdest thing I think that's ever happened. I corrected it all, I did everything he said, and they bought the painting, and that was it. But Yeah, that was one of the funniest. The other one is you get these things where people say to you, "Now, don't you think I look a little like Jimmy Stewart?" It's like, no. But then you have to say, okay, well, if he wants to look like Jimmy Stewart, what is it about him that makes him think that he looks like Jimmy Stewart? Anyway, we got through that one. And then he came in, he brought the painting back, and I decided to use gambling, whatever that stuff is, because somebody told me to play with it. And I did. And because of the way I painted his coat bright blue. I mean, really blue, like cobalt blue and white. And then what I did was I layered glaze after glaze after glaze over it. And then he called me back and said, "Could you come in my office? I'll take you to lunch. I'm starting to look a little like a pimp." I was like, what? First you looked like Jimmy Stewart, then you told me that you weren't mean enough and this was going in a boardroom. And he said, "Just come in here and take a look." So I went in there, and something about the varnish that I was using just all started going down, and there was that cobalt blue coat underneath it with a whole line of dark stuff on the bottom of it. And anyway, that was fun. We fixed it too.
Well, where are we on time? Folks know.
We're wrapping up.
We are wrapping up.
Okay.
I want to thank you all for coming, for letting us spout our thoughts and ideas out to you, and more broadly for joining us in the festival here and letting us offer to you what we have, and hoping that you can share our enthusiasm for these subjects. Thank you so much for being here.